is the account of when Nebuchadnezzar went insane. And I asked y'all to read that last week. If I had stickers, I would give them to you, but I don't have any stickers. So I'm not going to ask who read them. But let's look at Daniel 4 while Lyndon is setting me up. Can you hear me? Am I on? Yes. Okay, good. Oh, okay, goody. Now I can do this. All right, let's just do this. We're going to review and complete page 4. So that is the image from Daniel 2. So if you would look at Daniel 2, and always we want to review because a lot of this is new information for you. And this is a vision of King Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel told him it was a vision of things to come. And as we look at it, we can see that it's history. So it did come about. So if you would look at that, the head was made of gold, representing what? Babylon. And then the chest and arms of silver represented what empire?
Persia.
The Medo-Persian Empire. That's the Medes and the Persians. And I'll show you a map in a moment where the Medes and the Persians actually were. The belly and thighs were made of what? Bronze or brass. And it represented the Greek Empire. And if you'll look here, you can see that the Babylonian Empire lasted from 66 to 64. About 70 years is what they lasted. And then the Persian Empire lasted about 200 years. The Greek Empire lasted almost 300 years. Anyway, that's not quite right. But anyway, they lasted really until 400 AD. So the legs were made of iron, and they represented the ancient Roman Empire. And we have to really remember that that was the ancient Roman Empire, because the feet will represent a new and revived Roman Empire. So the feet were made of what? Clay and iron. And they didn't mix. Had 10 toes, which represents 10 nations, and it will be the future Roman Empire. And we think probably when you think about the European Union, it's about 20 nations, maybe 24 nations in the European Union, which could be a very great start for this new Roman Empire to come about eventually. The rock represented whom? Jesus Christ. And it was his kingdom. The mountain coming from that rock represents his kingdom on earth. And it destroyed this statue. And you can see the rock right at that statue's feet. It landed on its feet and destroyed it. And there was nothing left to it. It just blew away like the dust. So that is Nebuchadnezzar's dream. So what this is telling us, that there will be many empires in the world through time, but eventually God will send his Son Jesus Christ, who will destroy all kingdoms on earth and set up his kingdom, which will be perfect. It will last forever. It's an eternal kingdom. So now let's look at page. Any questions on that or any comments? All of that has been fulfilled except for what part? The feet. The feet, which is the future Roman Empire. And that has not been fulfilled, nor has the rock coming from heaven been fulfilled. So let's look at chapter 4 of Daniel, because I want you to read this because you'll understand better the vision of Daniel 7. So in Daniel 4, I may have to stand up because I'm not very good at talking sitting down. I'll try it though. Okay. Daniel 4, 29 through 36. Let's just read that. It's not in your notes, and it's not on one of your passages. I added this later. So, as King Nebuchadnezzar, the most powerful man on earth, was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon, listen to what he said. Is not this the great Babylon I have built as the royal residence? Kind of prideful, isn't it? And one of the things that God hates, no, the thing God hates the most is pride, because we're going to find that he could not have built that without the assistance of God. I have built this great Babylon by my mighty power and for the glory of my majesty. Sounds like Satan, doesn't it? Lucifer, when he was kicked out of heaven, because this is what he said too. His power, his majesty. Even as the words were on his lips, a voice came from heaven. This is what is decreed for you, King Nebuchadnezzar. Your royal authority has been taken from you. It can be taken if it was given by somebody. If someone gives you something, they can take it back. That's what my mother always said, all right? So who gave him this authority and this power initially? God did. And now he's saying it's going to be taken from you. And who will take it from him? God. You will be driven. Now listen to what's going to happen to Nebuchadnezzar. You will be driven from people, and you will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like the ox. 7 times, and we're going to learn in prophecy that when we read 7 times or any kind of number with times, it means year, okay? So 7 times in prophecy means 7 years. 7 years, 7 times will pass by for you until you acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth. Do we believe that? Is that still true today?
Yes.
And gives them to anyone he wishes. Look at what God is taking for himself, that he is sovereign over all kingdoms, and he gives these kingdoms to anyone he wishes. Immediately, verse 30-something, what had been said about Nebuchadnezzar was fulfilled. He was driven away from people and ate grass like the ox. His body was drenched with the dew of heaven because he slept outside or in a cave like an animal, until his hair grew like the feathers of an eagle and his nails like the claws of a bird. That was Nebuchadnezzar when he was insane. And God did this to him because of him taking the power that should belong to God. Hey, babe, come up here and sit with us. So, Stephanie, while you're here, honey, go back and turn at least that one light off so we can see this. This is a very, very famous painting by William Blake. Can you see it? Kinda. Get that one too, sweetheart. And then stay there and turn them back on. You can see this is by William Blake. He lived in England in the late 1700s, and this is one of the most famous paintings of Nebuchadnezzar going insane. He was not able to work in his, thank you, Steffi, wherever you are, was not able to work in his kingdom, in his palace, so most people think that it was Daniel who took care of the empire of Babylon while he was insane. So I wanted you to learn to remember that, because we're going to read some things that have to do with Nebuchadnezzar. Look at verse 34. At the end of that time, now this is when Nebuchadnezzar is giving his testimony. I, Nebuchadnezzar. Isn't that interesting? And most scholars think that Nebuchadnezzar did become a believer in the God of heaven and earth. Because look what he says. I, Nebuchadnezzar, raised my eyes toward heaven, and my sanity was restored. I praised the Most High. I honored and glorified him who lives forever. That is the Nebuchadnezzar that we've been studying about, that's been so capricious and so awful. It put people in fiery furnaces and stuff like that. And now he's recognizing God as the Most High. His dominion is an eternal dominion. His kingdom endures from generation to generation. He does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. So Nebuchadnezzar began to figure out the sovereignty of God Most High. No one can hold back his hand. No one can say to God, "What have you done?" We wouldn't ever do that, would we? Oops. At the same time, Nebuchadnezzar says that my sanity was restored. My honor and splendor were returned to me for the glory of my kingdom. He remembered now who gave him his splendor and his honor. My advisors and nobles sought me out. That was Daniel. That was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and probably many others. And I was restored to my throne, and I became even greater than before. This is Daniel 4. It's a very important chapter for us to know. And I will tell you, I don't think anybody ever taught me about the insanity of of Nebuchadnezzar when I was a little girl. Anybody ever study that when you were a child? If you grew up in Assemblies of God, you probably did. But we didn't in where I grew up. All right, so the dream and visions of Daniel are apocalyptic. When we talk about apocalyptic literature, that's a real good word, and you've heard it, it means the end of times. And eschatological is another big word, and what it does is it means the end times, but it's represented in symbolic terms. So we are reading eschatological literature tonight because we're reading about the end of the ages in symbolic form. And we're reading apocalyptic literature because it talks about the end of times. So that's the reason I wanted you to know that is because you cannot take Daniel 7 literally, the beast coming out of the ocean. If you do, it'll scare you really bad. And it's symbolic. It's eschatological. All right, let's look at this. Let's look at passage 2 in your notes. That's in the front of your notebook. Passage 2, it says Daniel 7. And everybody found that in the front of your notebook? And the black is just what a moderator would say. Then the green is the vision itself, and then the red is the interpretation. And what I want you to know is that this passage is kind of mixed up in the Bible. So I've put it all together and organized it my way. And we're not going to tell Daniel I did that, okay? So we're going to read passage 2, and as we read it, you underline some really important words in there so you can go back and find them. We're going to underline these words. Just look up here because we're not going to read it yet. You're going to underline the words, the 4 winds, because we're going to read about 4 winds. We're going to read about the great sea, 4 beasts. Now, I am not a numbers person in the scriptures. Does anybody know what the number 4 represents? Okay. All right. 4 beasts. One of the beasts is like a winged lion. Now, if something is like something, that doesn't mean it is that thing. It's a simile, a figure of speech called simile. It's similar to. So we're finding this one beast similar to a winged lion. We see another beast that's like a bear. Now that's a simile again. It has one shoulder higher than the other and 3 ribs in its mouth. We're going to find one like a winged leopard with 4 heads and 4 wings. Then, now you see that the winged lion, the bear, and the leopard, we know what those animals are, don't we? So these animals, these beasts are similar to animals on earth. But this 4th one, it's an unidentified, terrible beast, which has no earthly counterpart. There will be no beast on the earth like this one. It has bronze teeth, iron claws, and 10 horns. All right, so now let's read passage 2. And this is Daniel in his bed dreaming that vision, dreaming that dream. You can't see him very well, but he's over there. All righty. We're going to read this. Let's see. Daniel's vision on passage 2 of 4 dreadful beasts in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon. If you want to write a note there, Belshazzar was perhaps the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. So Nebuchadnezzar has died now. Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying in bed. Circle the word dream and circle the word visions because they have different meanings. He wrote down the substance of his dream. Daniel said, now here's verse 2, here's the dream, and I've put it in green for you. I looked in my vision at night, and there before me were the 4 winds of heaven. So better circle that, the 4 winds of heaven, churning up the great sea. Now in the Bible, when you read about the great sea, that would be generally the Mediterranean Sea, right? So we have these winds churning up the great sea, and we know how the sea churned. We can read Jonah and know how a huge storm came up on the Mediterranean Sea. Verse 3, 4 great beasts, underline that, each different from the others, came up out of the sea. The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it. Now, I'm going to explain what this is to you, and there is no way that most of us would ever know what that was all about if we didn't have a teacher. Neither did Daniel know what this was about. He had to have a teacher, and he was the one who helped Nebuchadnezzar in this vision and dream. He was not able to interpret it. He had to have help too. So that makes me feel better, right? Verse 5, and there before me was a second beast. It looked like a bear, so you might want to underline that. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, get up and eat your fill of flesh. So now we have the 2 beasts, right? Coming up out of the sea, which is churning with the winds, the 4 winds. Verse 6, after that I looked, and there before me was another beast, one that looked like what? Leopard. A leopard. And on the back of this leopard were 4 wings like those of a bird. This beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. That's a pretty scary one, wasn't it? Verse 7, after that, in my vision at night, I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. Okay? So there's the dream. So, I could have read it off there, but I didn't. So I'm going to just move. Did you get all those words underlined? Dreams and visions. Okay? 4 winds, the great sea. Now look at number 1. Dreams occur when one is asleep. So part of this was a dream that he had when he was asleep. Whereas visions occur when one is awake. And you read the visions of Zechariah, and they're all visions. He was awake and he just saw something coming. Jeremiah had visions. Isaiah had visions. Most of the prophets had visions, and many of them had dreams. Dreams are when you are asleep, and visions when you are awake. And it's like a movie comes into your visuals area. So the four winds of heaven represent the hand of the sovereign God in the affairs of the earth. We've been talking and we've been reading how God says, I'm the one that's in charge. I'm the one who gives authority and power and sovereignty to a king. I'm the one, and I can take it away. So the four winds of heaven represent his hand in the affairs of the earth. Storm. Somebody taught me how to do sound effects, and I don't know how to get it off now. Anyway, that was a storm on the great sea. And anyway, can you imagine it? The churning and restless sea represent the nations of the world. So here we have the four winds, and God is churning through the nations of the world throughout history. So that's what the sea represents, the nations of the world. So let's think about the sea, and let's see how it could represent nations. Well, the sea is violent, isn't it? And it's chaotic. And it has unpredictable currents and very, very strong storms, right? Now, how would that represent the nations of the world? The nations of the world, just think about our nation recently. Violent, chaotic. I mean, it's very chaotic right now, isn't it? And our relationships with other nations is chaotic. So nations are violent, they're deadly, they're chaotic, and often at war. So it seems from our perspective, and I'm going to tell you, I do not understand this because I don't have the thoughts of God, okay? I don't know how this works because it looks like to me that nations resolve their issues one with the other generally by way of a war, right? And so they work out their destinies through war. But in this picture that Daniel is getting and is telling us, it will be revealed that God is sovereign over the affairs of the nations. I don't understand that. But I think when we all get to heaven and get to look back at history, we will see the hand of God working throughout history. And we will certainly see it when He gives us the future to Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. So there's no way that we could ever, any man could have ever done the prophecy and the predictions that Daniel did without God giving them to him, of how the nations work together and how He rules over the affairs of the nations. And I would be willing to listen to anybody who wants to comment on that, because it's hard. It's a very hard concept, isn't it? Because we think we're doing it, but God says He is. Okay, page 7. Roman numeral 1, letter A. Do you like this notebook, by the way? Took about 20 years to make this. Not really, but it did take me a long, long time. And every time I teach this class, I make it better. So page 7, Roman numeral 1, we have read Daniel 7, 1 through 7. That was Daniel's vision and dreams. And you underlined all those words. And now let's look at verse 3, the four great beasts. First of all, letter A, dreams, visions, the four winds, and the sea. What is that? Number 1, dreams are when one is asleep. And visions occur when one is awake. It's just like a TV or a movie in your room. Number 2, the four winds of heaven, that should not be heavens. The four winds of heaven represent the sovereign hand of the Most High God over the affairs of the nations. Number 3, the great and churning and restless sea represents the chaotic and dangerous nations of the world. Now we're going to see these beasts come out of this very chaotic nations of the world. And they're going to be empires. And so these empires are coming out of the Mediterranean Sea. And I'll show you how that's going to happen. Letter A on number 3. Just as the seas are a place of chaos, evil, and danger, so the what? Nations of the earth can be violent and deadly, chaotic, and at war. Now look what Daniel says in chapter 4. This is where Nebuchadnezzar went insane. We were just reading it. Verse 35 is what he says. God does as he pleases with the powers of heaven and the peoples of the earth. Does that mean we don't go vote since God's in control? It doesn't, does it? No, because that is our duty as a citizen. And I don't know how that all works. But you'll never find me at home on election day, because it is very important, because God is using us to do his will. So we must go vote. We must be involved in our government. Yes, sir? David?
Daniel was very involved with his government.
Yes, he was. David said that Daniel was very involved. He worked with the king. He advised the king. In fact, he led the king to know the Most High God.
And yet God worked through all that.
And yet God did it all. Yeah, it's very fascinating. No one can hold back God's hand or say to him, "What have you done?" Now look at what Isaiah 40:15 says. Surely the nations are like a drop in a bucket. That's not very significant, is it? They are regarded as dust on the scales. He weighs the islands as though they were fine dust. And Isaiah 40, verse 23. This is very important too, because this says he brings princes to naught. Naught means nothing. He brings them to nothing. They think they're really cool, right? But he brings them to nothing. He reduces the rulers of this world to nothing. That's why so many nations and their rulers fall, because their power is in themselves. They think in and of themselves when it's really of God. So that's page 7. Let's look at Daniel number 4. Daniel 4. God. Why don't you put the word God there instead of he? God does as he pleases with the powers of what? Heaven. And the peoples of the what? Earth. No one can hold back his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" I really like that. We would never say that, would we? Isaiah 40:15. Surely the nations are like a drop in a bucket. They are regarded as nothing or naught, N-O-U-G-H-T, on the scales. He weighs the islands as though they were fine dust. And then we read Isaiah 40:23. He brings to naught and reduces the princes of this world to nothing. Look at 1 Chronicles 29:11 and 12. Chronicles is the chronicles of the kings of Israel and Judah, the divided kingdom. And it's a very important passages or chapters for us to study. Whoops. All right. This is a king speaking, and he says, "Yours, Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the majesty and the splendor. Sounds like the songs we sing, doesn't it? For everything in heaven and earth is yours. They are yours, Lord. Yours, Lord, is the kingdom. You are exalted as head over all. And I personally am so glad that that is my God. He is my God. Wealth and honor come from you. All good things, according to the scriptures, come from God. You are the ruler of all things. In your hands, look at this, are strength and power to exalt and give strength to all. This should really encourage us in our times of chaos in our own nation, when it seems like who we are as Americans is not being, not only not appreciated, it's being wanted to be destroyed. I mean, we're destroying who we are as Americans. And I can only trust and put my faith in God and I say these to God. This is my prayer when I get scared, when I listen to the news, which I try to do every day, but for only about 15 minutes, because it really frightens me. And so I tell God, yours is the power, yours is the glory and the greatness and the majesty and the splendor. All strength and power and strength come from Him. So in this vision that Daniel is having, we see the invisible winds of God blow over the surface of the nations of the world. Do we understand it? No, we don't. God gives the nations power, wealth, and strength. Question: what did He tell Abraham when He first made His covenant with Abraham about Abraham's nation? He said, you're going to become a great nation. What did He tell him about his great nation? First of all, God is giving it to him, isn't He? But God said, I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse those who curse you. That's in Genesis 12, 1 through 4. And you really need to remember that, because that is why I so support our country supporting Israel, because God made that promise. And you look at the nations who have cursed Israel, and you look at the nations who have blessed Israel, and you will see the hand of God blessing and cursing those nations. Great Britain is my greatest example. It used to say that the whole empire, the sun never set on the entire empire because it was so big. All over the world, the sun would never set at one time over the British Empire. And it was 1948 when the British turned their backs on Israel. And what is Great Britain like today? It's just one little island. One little island. No more empire anymore. And it didn't take long for God to get that to happen. So I think when you look at history and you look at those kinds of things, you'll really see the hand of God being sovereign over the nations of the chaotic earth. God gives the nations power, wealth, and strength. Why? Why? In order to accomplish His will in His time on earth. So that's number 4 on your notes. Let's read that. We already did that, didn't we? Okay. Did we get number 4 already? Okay. So let's look at those 4 great beasts. This is a picture. You can look at your picture on page 7 as well. And let's read what Daniel was told about these 4 great beasts. So let's look at passage 2. Let's see. Passage 2, letter B at the bottom. The interpretation. So, here's what Daniel said. I was troubled in spirit. I might be troubled too if I had a vision like that, wouldn't you? And the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. I approached one of those standing there and asked him the meaning of all of this. See, God didn't expect us to interpret this by ourselves. He had to go to somebody. And he told me and gave me the interpretation of these things. Now look at the interpretation, verse 17. The 4 great beasts are 4 kings that will rise from the earth. Are you coming to our class? There's some good notebooks right back there, those green ones, okay? So, we know that the 4 great beasts, they were like a lion, a bear, a leopard, and a terrifying beast. And Daniel asked for an interpretation, and I'm going to have to read over here. He told me and gave me the interpretation. The 4 great beasts are 4 kings. And later we're going to learn that they're kings of empires that will rise from the earth. So what's the interpretation? These 4 beasts represent 4 powerful kingdoms coming from the earth, really from the Mediterranean Sea. We're going to find that every one of them came from the Mediterranean area, rising from among the nations of the earth, or that chaotic sea. Do you remember the statue, those empires? Let me just show you what that is. First of all, we need to really understand the definition of a nation and a kingdom and an empire. A nation is one nation with one ruler, okay? A kingdom is one nation with a king. An empire is a group of nations who may have their own king, but there is one great king over them, the emperor, or the king of the kings, the king of kings. That's what an empire is. So we're going to see that these are empires coming out of the great sea. You understand the distinction of those 3 words? Okay. So the ones standing there are interpreting angels, and we're going to find later that one of those interpreting angels was Gabriel, that he came to Daniel and explained these visions and dreams to him. Here are the beasts, 4 powerful kingdoms, 4 powerful empires coming out of the nations of the world. Each kingdom, each empire is depicted as a predatory beast. But they weren't like that when we saw the statue, were they? They weren't predatory beasts in the statue. So here they are again. And how is that different from the statue of Daniel 2? How were those kingdoms revealed to us in the statue?
As gold and silver.
Gold and silver and
Bronze.
okay, but they weren't beasts, were they? They weren't predatory. So it's more like their wealth and their status in the world. Now, as I told you, the very first lesson, the book of Daniel is progressive in its visions. So in Daniel 2, he tells us about these empires: Babylon, Medes and the Persians, the Greeks, and the Romans. Now in Daniel 7, he's giving us more information, and now he's telling us how they are like predatory beasts. So number 1, under letter B, we have 4 what? Rising from the dangerous and evil sea.
Beasts.
4 beasts rising from the dangerous and evil sea. And what is that sea?
Earth.
No, what's the sea? Mediterranean Sea. That's right. And they represent 4 powerful empires or kingdoms. And they are rising from the nations of the world, and they rule over the nations of the world. These beasts, called nations, are like, there's the simile there. What's the first one? It's like a what?
Lion.
A lion. The second one is like a
Bear.
bear. The third one is like a leopard. And the fourth one, there is nothing comparable to this on the earth. We can't say it's like anything because we've never seen one like this. It is just a terrible, terrible, terrifying, dreadful beast. There's nothing like it. A dreadful and terrifying beast. In Daniel 2, the statue emphasizes the power, the military power, and the outward glory of the four empires. Four. In contrast, the beasts of Daniel 7 are depicted as what kind of beasts? Predatory. That's right. What does that mean? Predatory.
They hunt.
What?
They hunt.
That's exactly right. They hunt and they devour their prey. So they look for prey. They look for something weaker than they, and they devour them. They're greedy and violent. So now let's look at the beasts, okay? The first beast was like a lion. This is Daniel 7, verse 4. And it had eagle's wings. I watched until its wings were plucked off. So here's the lion with wings. The lion in ancient history always depicted Babylon. All right? So here we're going to learn that this lion is Babylon. And it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being. Now watch this. And the mind of a human was given to it. So when would it have stood on 2 feet and be given a mind like a human? And mind in this context is heart. The heart of a man is where his thoughts come from. So he was standing on 2 feet, and he had the mind of a human given to it. What do we read in Daniel 4?
4.
We just read it. What happened in Daniel 4?
Nebuchadnezzar.
What?
His mind.
Nebuchadnezzar went insane. That's exactly right. But eventually, when he recognized the sovereignty and the power of God, he was able to stand on 2 feet again like a human being. And God returned his sane mind back to him. So the lion represented the first empire, the Babylonian Empire. In fact, Babylon's symbol was a lion. And you can go to Iraq today and go to where the city of Babylon was, and they have discovered in the last 100 years a stone lion on a big stone stand. And underneath, he sits like this, and right between the paws and underneath him is a human being, a man. And it's just, again, the symbolic of how predatory and violent Babylon was. So it was represented by a lion. In his vision, the wings of an eagle represented Babylon's what? Great power. So it was a lion that had great power, visualized by the wings. The insanity of King Nebuchadnezzar was represented in verse 4. It tells us that the wings were torn off, right? So the wings were torn off. So he lost his power when he went insane. And yet his sanity was restored how many years later? 7. And what word did I tell you in prophecy when it uses the word, what's the word for years? Times. Yeah, it says so 7 times later he received his sanity back. So he's standing on 2 feet and he received a human heart, or what's the other word for heart? Mind. Does that make sense to you? So Babylon is represented in these 2 chapters. In chapter 7 by the winged lion. In chapter 2 by the head of what? Gold. That's right, the head of gold. So the winged lion, chapter 7, head of gold in chapter 2. So you can see here that in chapter 2 he just says, Nebuchadnezzar, You're the head of gold. That's all he says. Doesn't give us any more information, does he? In the next vision in Daniel 7, he gives us a lot more information. Babylon was defeated by the Medes and the Persians in 539 BC. We read about that in Daniel 5 with the writing on the wall. And I learned that story when I was a little kid too, about the writing on the wall with everybody was drunk. There's 1,000 people at this party. And the king sees the writing on the wall. And it says, you have been weighed in the balance and have been found wanting. And tonight, your kingdom will be divided and you will die. That's chapter 5 of Daniel. And that's when the Medes and the Persians came in and just took over Babylon without a shot fired, really. And it took less than just a few hours, because they drained the water out of the Euphrates River that surrounded Babylon, or went in front of Babylon, and they were able to walk in under the gates of the walls of Babylon. And King Belshazzar died that night. The prophetic books, this is very important as you read the Bible. When you read the prophetic books of Daniel and Ezekiel, those were written during the time that the Jews lived under the power of the Babylonians. Daniel had his visions and dreams when he was in exile in Babylon. Ezekiel had the same visions and dreams while he was in exile in Babylon. He was taken as a young man also to Babylon as an exile. So the prophetic books, when you read them, if you'll understand where they are, then you'll understand those books better. Now, Israelites were first called Jews when they lived in Babylon. So the first time you really read the word Jew, referring to God's people, the Israelites, is in the book of Esther. And they're called Jews. And Esther was also written during the... No, that's not right. Okay. Almost got ahead of myself. Why would they be called Jews when they were living in exile in Babylon? We know them as Israelites. We could call them Judahites. We could call them the Hebrew people. But they called them Jews. How could that, where'd that come from?
The southern kingdom of Judah.
What?
The southern kingdom of Judah.
They were from the kingdom or the nation of Judah. And so instead of saying the people from Judah, they just used it as slang and called them Jews. And so that all happened while they were in Babylon. And so let's see, page 8. Let's fill that out. Numbers 1 through 8. You ready? I bet you all have it done, don't you? Number 1, the Babylonian Empire is represented by the what?
Lion.
The lion, that's right. The lion had wings of a what? An eagle. And they were added to the lion in this dream to give it more power. Because a lion is powerful. But you put eagle's wings on a lion and it's extremely powerful. And that's why they were added in this vision. The letter number 3, what was torn off of this lion? The wings. So his power was left him. The torn off wings probably refer to King Nebuchadnezzar's what? Insanity. What chapter is that? 4. Don't forget. Sound like a teacher, don't I? That'll be on your test. Okay, number 4. So then we see this lion standing on 2 feet and receiving a human mind. And what's the other word we would call mind? Heart. May refer to his rule, his humanitarian rule, after what was restored?
Mind.
His sanity. Mm-hmm. Number 5, the lion with eagle's wings is equivalent to what on the statue?
The head of gold.
That's right, the head of gold. In chapter what? 2. Both the statue with the head of gold and the lion with eagle's wings represent Babylon. Number 6, Babylon fell to the Medes and the Persians in 539 BC. I'm going to see if I can find a map. Here we go. I'll show you this. This dark spot, if you could see it, is the Babylonian Empire. Here's Israel right here. So Israel was part of the Babylonian Empire. So then the Persians come along in 539 BC. Here's Media, which is the Medes, and here's Persia. You'll see that Media was stronger at the beginning of their friendship. And eventually Persia gained the strength over Media. And it eventually became not the Medo-Persian Empire, it just became the Persian Empire. And the Persian Empire, all the way over to India, all the way through Afghanistan, Turkestan, Pakistan, all those stands. And then into Iran, and then into Iraq. And today it goes all the way over here, all the way up to there, which is Turkey today. And then it went all the way down here to Egypt and Saudi Arabia. That was their empire. It was the largest empire ever in the whole history of the world. So, where was I on that one? Oh yeah, the Medes and the Persians. It was conquered by the Medes and the Persians. And let's see, number 7. Oh, Babylon today. Where will you find Babylon today? Iraq, that's right. And I will show you, I think I can see it on, no I can't. But anyway, about right here in Babylon, it was still called Babylon, but it was part of the Persian Empire. Right about here is Ur, U-R. Who came from Ur? Abraham. About 1,500 years before all of this happened. So Babylon today is known as Iraq. And what 2 prophetic books were written during the time of the Babylonian Empire? Daniel and Ezekiel. And in Ezekiel's visions, he was transported back to Jerusalem in his, maybe physically, but probably in a vision. And he saw how the Israelites were just living such terrible lives back in Jerusalem and worshiping gods right there in their temple. It's pretty bad. So now then, let's look at number 8. It was during their exile in Babylon that they were first called Jews. All right. Now let's look at the bear real fast. Suddenly, another beast, a second beast, like a bear. Was it a bear? No. Say no. No, it was like a bear. It was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And if you look at the picture on your notebook, you'll see that one shoulder raised higher. And you can see the 3 ribs. What do you think the 3 ribs represent?
3 nations that it devoured.
I bet you're right. 3 nations that it conquered. And the shoulder, the one shoulder over the other, is that of the Persians, because they were stronger than the Medes, and they became eventually became the Persian Empire. This beast, this thing like a bear, was told to get up and eat your fill of flesh. It represents the Medo-Persian Empire. And you can see that the Medo-Persian Empire lasted just right at 200 years, from 539 to 330 BC. Now, from Malachi to Matthew is how many years? 400 years. So the Medo-Persian Empire fell at 330 BC. So it fell right in that time between the testaments, between Malachi and Matthew. Okay? To Greece. The one higher shoulder represents Persia being stronger than Media. And the 3 ribs will refer to Persia's 3 major conquests. Let's see if I have, you want me to go back to the map and show you their 3 major conquests? I'll go back, watch this. Here we go, there we go. The 3 major conquests of the Persian Empire was Lydia, right up here. Their king was named Croesus, Croesus, right here. He was the richest guy you could ever meet. Who was the guy in children's stories that loved gold and everything he touched turned to gold? Midas. That story comes from Lydia because they were so wealthy. Croesus, you ever heard the expression rich as Croesus? No. Now you do. Now you can use it. If you're as rich as Croesus, you have so much money you do not know what to do with it. And that's the way the king of Lydia was. His name was Croesus. This is all Turkey. That was one of their that was one of the ribs. Egypt down here was another rib. And did I say Babylon the third? Babylon was the 3rd rib. So let's go back now. All right. The 3 ribs, Lydia, which is now Turkey, Babylon, which is now Iraq, and Egypt. Conquered all those. That's what the ribs probably mean. Eating much flesh refers to all the nations that the Medes and the Persians devoured. Everywhere they went, they conquered another nation. And that's called, that prophecy was fulfilled that way when it said eating all the flesh until you're full. And it's all of the nations that they defeated. So let's look at page 8, letter B. Number 1. The bear represents which empire? Medo-Persian Empire. And the years are 539 to 330 BC. The bear was raised up on one side because one shoulder was stronger than the other. This represents who? The Persians, who had earlier defeated the Medes. You okay? You okay?
Yeah.
Is it Crystal? What's your first name?
Amanda.
Amanda. All right. I'm going to get him right pretty quickly.
Okay.
Aaron, what's your wife's name?
Krista.
Okay, I was just.
There are 2 Aarons, so that's where you get.
That's true. Thank you. Y'all look alike too.
We go to the same barber.
Number 3. What did it carry in its mouth? Ribs. The 3 ribs probably refer to their 3 major conquests. The first one was Babylon, was the first one. And then Lydia, which is what nation today? Turkey. And the 3rd one? Egypt. And Egypt is still Egypt. Number 4. The armies of the Medo-Persian Empire did indeed eat much flesh, because that represents the battlefields that they conquered, going all the way from India through Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Turkey, Israel, Egypt, all of those countries. They ate much flesh. Number 5, let's see. Oh, I had the map there. I didn't have to go all the way back, did I? The Persian Empire fell in 330 BC to Alexander the Great of Greece. Did y'all know that? The Persian Empire in chapter 2 is represented by what on the statue? What?
Arms and
arms of silver. The Persian Empire is the arms of silver. Yeah. Is that what I have? Yeah. And the bear of Daniel 7. Same thing. So remember again, when we read prophecy, that it's progressive. You get a little bit, then you get a little bit more, and then you get a little bit more. And if you try to read book of Revelation, the very last book of prophecy, you'll never understand it until you read all those other chapters of prophecy, because it's progressive. So the arms of silver and the bear in Daniel 7. Now, when you read about the Persian Empire in the Bible, there are history books of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. I'm teaching those in my class on Sunday morning. Most fascinating studies, because they all came back from, or they were able to come back from exile in Persia in the book of Ezra. They rebuilt the temple in the book of Ezra. They rebuilt the whole city, the walls and the foundation, in the book of Nehemiah, because they have come back from Persia. The book of Esther, she married a Persian king, and we meet when they tried to annihilate all of the Jews, and she was able to save her people. That's all under the Persian rule. The books of prophecy, written during the time of the Persian rule, were Haggai and Zechariah and Malachi, the last 3 books of the Old Testament. So when you read those 6 books, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther, read them with the knowledge and with the context that they are living under the Persian Empire. And you'll read about all of these kings. You'll read about Darius and Cyrus and Xerxes and Artaxerxes. You'll read about all of them in those books. They're Persian kings. And so it helps you to understand it. The Old Testament was completed during this time. And Persia today is known as Iran. And have we finished that? No. Okay. Number 7, the Bible history books of the Persian Empire are Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. And the 3 books of prophecy of the Persian Empire? Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Listen, when you're reading the book of Ezra, you must, if you want to read with understanding, you must read the book of Ezra with the books of Haggai and Zechariah, because that's where they're introduced. And if somebody told me that years ago, I might have finished reading the Bible all the way through, but I just couldn't do it because I didn't know what it was about.
If what? What did you say?
I don't know. What did I say?
Why
The
would you
book
have
of-
read that?
If I had known how the books of the Bible are chronologically laid out and under what empire the people were living, and that when you read Ezra, you should read Haggai and Zechariah. Had I known that, I might have understood it better. When you read Nehemiah, it's when you read Malachi. You didn't know that? Yeah. Goody. All righty. Now, number 9, the Old Testament was completed during the middle of the Persian Empire. And number 10, today it is known as what?
Iran.
And I was supposed to do page 9 today and didn't get to it. So next week, let me see what we're going to do next week. I try not to get behind. Okay. I'll try not to. Did I chase rabbits tonight? I think I did. Any questions, comments? I need some comments from people. Tell me what you're learning here that's going to be helpful to you.
Nations are beasts.
Nations are beasts. Beastly?
Well, and I'm trying to compare it to like what's happening now. Like,
Yes.
Yeah. Nothing's changed, has it? Nothing has changed in history. That's why we need to know history. Because you can learn from history and what to do and what not to do.
And it repeats itself.
Repeats itself. Yes, it does. Anybody else have a comment or a question? Did you learn something tonight? Tell me something you learned then, though, so I feel better about letting y'all go home. What'd you learn? Aaron, what'd you learn? Either one of you.
The seas are the nations. The seas is the nations.
Oh,
Correct?
uh-huh.
Yeah.
The sea represents the nations. That's interesting, isn't it? And I really need y'all to think more about how God is in control, or at least He's sovereign. I'm not sure we want to say He's in control, but He is sovereign. That's kind of an interesting concept that I've got to study someday. Let's pray. Thank you, Father, for your word. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, Lord, to get to teach your word, how exciting it is, how fun it is to get to read your word and understand it. Lord, I pray that everyone in here will be blessed this week as they go through their days and through their work and through their lives, and that everything we do, Lord, will be to your honor and your glory, and that we'll study your word this week. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. And we're going to do page 9 and a few more pages next week. We'll do Greece and Rome next week.